My office is at the Presbyterian Church, so when ministers come and go, I get to meet them and see what they were. Basically, what's really fun is to find a minister who has become one as a second career. So when I met Scott, he looks organizational, just like he's been out, basically professorial, I'll call it. So we start talking. He said he's from Oklahoma, which he calls a flyover state, an oil and gas place, and where people play football. He dismissed it. But as he continued, I asked him, what were you then? How did you grow up, so to speak? So as he began to talk, I got a very different vision from a professor. He started talking about he liked music, he got in the music business. Then he touched on this issue of disc jockey. So my images completely blew apart then. He continued, made it more advanced, and he ended up selling advertisements for music and stuff. But during the conversation, what he did was, because he could see my face was surprised, he pulled out this picture of what my image really was. And I don't know if all of you in the olden days knew what a bad boy is. Is that still called?
Looks like my son Jordan.
Well, this is what I call So then I decided just to finish it off to find out the definition of bad boy. So Scott put that together. Surprise? Right?
Western boy from the 70s?
A bad boy is someone who has many characteristics of a naughty boy. He's independent and willful, does what he wants when he wants, doesn't follow trends, they follow him. He often looks scruffy but hip. He's not looking for trouble, but there's a sense of danger about him. For those reasons and more, he's irresistible to women. I don't know if he still is, but he was then. He's a heartbreaker with a 5 o'clock shadow, was the original bad boy. Welcome.
Now that guy in the picture is nothing but trouble. Trust me. That cat was nothing but trouble. Thanks for having me, guys. The original name of this talk was An Old Hippie Freak Looks at the Finish Line. And I know that you can't tell it to look at me now, but that guy in the picture, I was an old hippie freak, and I probably still am at heart in a lot of ways. But back when I first gave this talk, I gave it to the retired adults at the First Presbyterian Church in Stillwater, Oklahoma, which is the home of Oklahoma State University. And most of them are tenured professors, men and women, academics. These are smart people. And they want me to talk about aging, and I really had to think about it because aging, it's like, I had just turned 50, and all that AARP stuff started coming in the mail, and I was highly offended, right? I'm like, by God, I am not joining the AARP at 50, but I will demand my senior coffee at McDonald's. Happy to do that. And that was like 7 years ago, almost to the very day. So aging really starts occurring to me, middle age, the aches and pains that come along with it. And so about that time, my dad had a heart attack, and so we came really close to losing him. Really close. A few minutes wasted, and he would be gone. But thank God, helicopters, EMTs, stent technology. Can you believe that they can do that now? It's amazing. So thank God in a stent, Dad is as strong as a horse now. He gets these great electrocardiograms, and his EKGs are to die for. I hope so, because he almost did die for. But today he's in great shape, and he turns 80 in about a month. So for the first time in my life, I have to read that list very carefully. At the doctor's office, when you're going down that list of history on the health form, now I've got to check that box. Yes, there's a history of heart condition in my family. So at the time, I go right out, and I lose 30 pounds. I was doing so good. I was a runner, and I was pretty good about it all. But then the doctor says, you need to stop running now. I wish I had your knees. Stop now. So I've gained back every one of those 30 pounds, and probably a little more, if I'm being honest about it. But since then, working full-time in ministry, which is my 4th career, I have lost count. I've lost count of the number of people who have died in my orbit. As a full-time minister, 30, maybe more, and I'm around death a lot. It comes with a job, but when it comes close, personally, that's when you really think about it. And I think about it a lot, about how I'm going to finish out this game of life. And it was my dad's experience that caused me to really start looking at it. to look back a little bit. So I think we can all remember the first time we confront a death in the family. The first time we have to go to a funeral, and it's probably a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt that passes away. And for me, it was my great-grandmother on my mom's side, Edna Dodson. Now, she was quite a lady. She ran a nursing home / boarding house out of her house for like 40 years. It was a different time then. She had at least a dozen people living there at any given point in time. And at every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, she would feed at least a dozen more. So do the math. That's like 75 meals a day, every day, 365, including Christmas and other holidays. Now, she never made any really made any money at it, but it was her ministry for sure. And I will never forget the smell of those old men. And you ladies know exactly what I'm talking about, guys. I hate to break it to you, but we get a smell. We kind of do. And this was sort of an ode to sour perspiration and cigarette smoke with a hint of stale beer and that smell you get when you need to shave, all right? And they used to hang around playing dominoes while we kids would run through the house trying to cool off. The house had one of those old water coolers in it in the parlor. You know what I mean? If you're a certain age, you remember these. About 4 foot by 5 foot box. When you could get your face down close and feel that cool air coming off of the hamster cage? Only it's not cold like Central Air is right now. It's not really cold. But did anybody serve in the Army? Who served in the Army? Anyone? Were you ever stationed at Fort Sill?
No.
Okay, if you trained at Fort Sill, then you know it's a cooker. The summers are brutal, so those old water coolers are better than nothing in Lawton, Oklahoma in the dead of summer in the 60s. But there was always a crowd hanging out in the parlor to watch Gunsmoke with Marshall Dillon and Festus in black and white as everybody looked at TV. That's what those old Lokies call it, looking at TV. Well, Grandma Dodson passed away when she was like 90, and I was probably 9 or 10, and I vividly remember going to the funeral home with my mom and dad to see her. And so we go into the room where the casket is, and this cheesy TV funeral organ music is playing, right? And the lights are dim, and the casket is wide open, and so are my eyes. And it's cold in there because they've got real central air, and it's cranking. It's cold like a meat locker. And I kind of think about it. It sort of is a meat locker. But she looks beautiful, all right? They've got her in this nice dress. She's made up. She looks a lot younger. But I just don't know what to think or behave. I mean, this is creepy and scary for me, right? So my mom holds my hand, and she kind of drags me along. As she encourages me to go up to the coffin, to go up to her, and ever so gently, we touch Grandma's hand together. And I'll never forget what a dead body feels like. I will never forget, because here's my grandma, who I remember as this very warm and loving person, always kind and caring and warm. It's especially her warmth that comes back to me, because to 9 or 10-year-old me, when I touch her hand, all I can remember now is how cold she is. And lifeless and spiritless. It's ice cold, like a meat locker. So thankfully, over the years and a lot of theological work, the mystery of death has kind of been a little demystified to me. I mean, to be honest with you, it's not that complicated. Some people believe in a kind of heavenly afterlife to whatever degree you believe in that, depending on your tradition. For some of us, we get to meet Jesus. For others, we sit at God's feet in some formless, painless, wonderful, eternal existence that we try to imagine as heaven. For some people, St. Peter greets us at the Golden Gate. Maybe we get to turn on the sunrise or make it rain or whatever. Some of us get to spend eternity in some relaxing, gently rocking wave pool or an unending back massage or a pedicure or whatever it is for you. But for some of us, there's nothing spiritual about it at all. For some of us, it's just nothing. Lying on your back in a box like in some CSI TV show with your cold, dead fingers, pale, white, and nasty. And that's what's burned into my memory. That's what sticks with me. That is the train wreck that I think about when I think about my Grandma Dodson. And so that's the reason that you don't see too many open casket funerals in a Presbyterian church. Certainly not in ours. We don't come to worship a body. We come to worship God, and we celebrate life. It's a celebration. And I'm not trying to go morbid on you, but I think about this stuff all the time because guess what? It's my work. And I think about it personally because it is personal. Because of Dad. Because of my wife's Grandma Sally. Now, it's been a long time since we lost Sally. Sally was born in Latvia and spent all of her young life in Europe. And she spoke 5 languages and had one of the most fascinating lives. She lived the last of her 92 years in this wonderful assisted living space in Milwaukee, right on Lake Michigan. I mean, it was sweet. And Sally was sweet. I loved her, and she loved me too. Well, toward the end, Sally had trouble remembering a lot of things. So in our last visit with her, we're there for a couple of days, and we take her out to lunch to her favorite place, Olive Garden, for the seafood portofino, honey. Order for me, please, the seafood portofino. I love that. So we get back to her apartment, and we're talking, and she calls me over. She wants me to sit there. She says, oh, Scott, I just want you to know how much I love you. I love you so much. And it was so sweet and so wonderful, and she told me that a lot. So we continue to chat for a couple of minutes, and I start to get up and go in the kitchen maybe to get another cup of coffee, and she grabs my head, and she pulls my face down close to her, and she says, honey, who are you? So when Sally dies, we travel back to Milwaukee for the family reunion, and Becky and I pack the kids in the car, and we go. And on the way, Becky's dad calls, and he wants to know if I'm willing to do a prayer for them at Sally's funeral. Well, of course. I'm honored to be asked, and I say, sure, you bet I will. Are you kidding me? Now, keep in mind, this is like close to 15 years ago. I haven't had a sniff of seminary yet. I'm called to the ministry, yes, but I'm still finishing up the undergraduate degree that guy partied away back in the hippie days. So I got a lot of catching up to do, and at this point, I have no pastoral training. Zip, nada. So we get to Milwaukee, and Becky's family is there, and everybody flies in from everywhere, and we're at this pizza joint the night before. And Becky's dad and I are talking, and he's telling a story about making the funeral arrangements that day at the funeral home. And I said, well, did everything go all right? I mean, are we all set for tomorrow? Is there anything that I need to know? And you know what he says to me? You might as well have cold cocked me with a 2x4. He says, oh, it went great. Everything's all set. They asked me what I wanted to do about the funeral. I told them not to worry about a thing. And he slaps me on the back, and he looks me right in the eye, and he says, I told him, don't worry, we've got our own guy. I said, you're kidding me, right? He says, no. Why would I joke about a thing like that? And so here I am thinking, all I'm going to say is a little prayer, and 12 hours from now, I'm doing the whole funeral. Now, I wish I had a picture of the look on my face. It was deer in the headlights. I've never done a funeral. No training. The only thing I have with me is a Bible, and check this out. Becky's grandma Sally was Jewish. I have no clue about Judaism or any of the customs of it. I am completely blindsided, right? So I play it safe, and I go through the Bible, and I pick out a few verses from the Psalms. I figured that's a pretty safe book to work out of. And the next morning I get up early, and I camp out in the hotel bar where it's quiet so I can make a plan. And fortunately for all of my stress and worry, it turns out like most of the things that we stress and worry about, it turns out to be a pretty easy thing because nobody really knows the difference but me, right? So I read a few scriptures, and I pray, and we do an open mic, and we tell these great life stories, and we tell awesome stories. So I get to tell the story about Sally forgetting who I am, and we hear stories about Sally escaping from the concentration camps because she spoke German to the Gestapo on the street. She was a beautiful girl, and she talked her way through it, so they didn't take her away. We hear these wonderful stories about Sally and Becky's grandpa George making their way to the United States to start their businesses after the war. George was a tailor and Sally was a hairdresser. So we get to hear these awesome stories of Grandpa George's days as an agent for the underground. And Sally used to help him sew building plans and maps and stuff into the linings of the coats for the secret agents to hide from the Nazis. That is awesome stuff, right? But here's the kicker of it all. Becky knew her grandma Sally all her life as Sally. I knew Sally for 20 years, and we hear these wonderful stories about Sally, and Sally's not even her real name. Sally's real name is Zelma. Yeah, Zelma, but she hated Zelma, so she made everybody call her Sally, and nobody ever knew it until she died. We never knew it until we found out at the funeral. Wow. So I want to tell you about my friend Dale Northup. Dale went to the church at First United Presbyterian in Guthrie, Oklahoma, the first church that I served as pastor. And we lost Dale to cancer right after I got there. So I'm a brand new minister, but I fall in love with this guy from the get. He was a real character. He had tons of these funny little sayings. Shoot low, he's wearing my shirt. Money won't buy you happiness, but it will let you pick your misery. Send me in, coach. I don't smoke. And maybe my favorite, a lesson bought is worth 1,000 taught. And Dale was ornery as hell. This one Thanksgiving, he and his wife Linda, they're making this broccoli casserole with a jalapeno cheese sauce. It's got a little kick to it, but it's not too serious. But it's not enough for my man Dale. The hot stuff doesn't faze him at all. So Dale kicks it up a notch with 3 or 4 serrano peppers in the cheese sauce. And friends, we are talking on fire. All right? 3 or 4 times hotter than jalapenos. And when it's time to eat, their grandkids are just crying, but Dale's over in the corner giggling, sadistic. But he used to get a kick out of putting you on the spot and pushing you to do stuff that you might not do. For example, he taught Linda to fly a plane by the sink or swim method. He takes her up and just hands her the stick. Go on, baby. Don't be a wussy. You can do it. Fly the plane. Same thing with his son Keith, trying to teach him how to barefoot water ski. They're out on the water, and Dale says, you can do this. I'll get the boat going up about 50. All you got to do is just jump out there and do it. Don't be a wussy. Well, one thing leads to another, and Keith goes tumbling across the top of the water at 50 miles an hour. Now, I don't know if you water ski, but that water is hard. And hitting it at 50 miles an hour, Dale just sits there in the boat giggling. Well, it's done, isn't it? He loved Linda's spontaneity. She loved adventure as much as he did, and so she would do just about whatever he said, and he made Linda scuba dive without any lessons, and she doesn't even really swim. And he told jokes. I bet he told 1 million of them, and just before he died, my man Dale tells me this one. This old man and his wife notice that they are beginning to forget little things around the house, and it's starting to get dangerous, like they might leave the stove on and burn the house down, so they decide to go to the doctor and get some help. And the doctor says, start writing things down. Start making little reminders. So the old couple thinks this is a pretty good idea, and they go home, and the wife says, honey, will you please go out to the kitchen and get me a dish of ice cream, and don't forget to write that down so you won't forget. And he says, no, I can remember that. I can remember a dish of ice cream. And she said, well, but I want you to put some strawberries on it. So you better write that down so you don't forget. And he says, oh, don't be silly. A dish of ice cream and strawberries? I got this. Okay, dear, but can you put some whipped cream on top? Now write it down. You're going to forget. He says, come on now, my memory's not that bad. Ice cream, strawberries, whipped cream, I got it. So the wife hears him off in the kitchen, and he's banging around with these pots and pans, and he's making a racket. And it's not like getting a dish of ice cream and strawberries and whipped cream. He comes out of the kitchen 15 minutes later, walks over to his wife, and he sets her this beautiful plate of bacon and eggs. The wife takes one look at the plate, she looks at it, and she says, hey, where's the toast? Every one of these people has a great story, don't they? Family heritage and stuff that legend is made of. And not one of them is famous, or they haven't cured polio, or anything of distinctive worldwide recognition, but every one of them has a great story. And every one of us has a great story too, and that's the big takeaway. We have got to tell our stories. Becky's mom died of small cell lung cancer not too long ago, and Becky's cousin Kim wanted to come and visit us and hear Gladys tell her stories. Kim wanted to tell Gladys her stories too, because Gladys was the only living connection between Becky's cousin Kim and her own parents and her own heritage. So when Gladys died, it was over. The stories went with her. Game over. And Becky's mom had some mental health issues too, but the really sad thing is that Gladys just didn't have the energy anymore to tell the stories. She was out of gas. And I can't say that I blame her. She just couldn't be bothered because, see, she was really close to the end. So this is the lesson for us. Right now, while we're still in good shape, we got to tell our stories. Even if we're telling them for the 100th time, who cares? They are our family stories, and every one of us has a great story to tell. We owe it to our kids, to our grandkids, to our brothers and sisters, to anybody who will listen. Why do we always wait until the funerals and the memorial services to tell these great stories? Did you read Tuesdays with Maury? That's a great book. Mitch Albom made a name for himself as a sports writer in Detroit, and he got some bad news. Found out that his favorite professor in college was dying of cancer and only had a few months to live. So Mitch Albom flew every week across the country to spend Tuesdays with his favorite professor, Maury Schwartz, and they tell stories together, and they go and get ice cream and pizza. And as Maury is dying, he tells Mitch all his stories. And it's a great book, great stories, life lessons from a really learned man. But the punchline is that Maury plans his own funeral before he dies. Not to have the funeral after he dies. He insists that they have the funeral before he dies. You know why? So he can hear the stories. It's brilliant. Why do we save all these good stories for after we're gone? All these people have such nice things to say about us after we're dead and gone. What a waste. So now's the time to tell them. Now is the time to let our friends and our relatives tell our stories when we feel good, when we can enjoy them, when we can love them back. I just love that idea. But here's a pretty good bet. You know, maybe you're somebody's favorite teacher. All of you are somebody's favorite person. All of you have touched someone else's life in a wonderful way. So have a party. Couple glasses of wine. Tell your stories and let everybody tell stories about you. We need this connection so badly, and we just get too busy. And then it's too late. So make the time. Sit down with your kids. Go through all the pictures. Name the names and tell the stories. The biggest heartbreak is these family albums full of pictures, and you can't name half of the people in the album. So that's what I mean when I say I'm looking at the finish line. Aging has never bothered me. It's not bothering me now, but it occurs to me that I still got a lot of work to do. I'm 57, I'm well into the second half, and I'm thinking about the finish line. And relationships are everything. Relationships have always been more important to me than anything else I have, and I want to encourage us all to dig deeply into it, to be intentional about it. We owe it to our offspring to pass along who we are, who our families are, the rich heritage and stories that play out in real, everyday lives like ours. Real people, real stories, real life. So when we cross the finish line, we know. I want us to know that we played it as hard and fast as we could, because nobody gets out alive, friends. So let's leave it all on the field. Thank you.